The holiday that shattered everything. You want to know what complete invisibility feels like? It feels like standing in your own kitchen doorway, holding a homemade sweet potato casserole that took you 3 hours to make, watching your daughter-in-law Thessaly reorganize the serving dishes you've owned for 40 years because they don't match the aesthetic she's going for. It feels like your own son Marcus pretending he doesn't see you standing there while his wife explains to her sister why they had to make some tough decisions about the guest list this year. The guest list for Christmas dinner. In my house. I'm standing there like a ghost in my own home, watching this woman rearrange my grandmother's china that survived the Depression, World War II, and 50 years of family holidays, because it doesn't photograph well for her Instagram story. And the worst part? The absolute worst part is that nobody even looks up when I clear my throat. That's how I knew. That's the exact moment I understood that I wasn't family anymore. I was furniture. Useful furniture that occasionally made noise, but furniture nonetheless. My name is Serafina Caldwell. I'm 73 years old, and I've been disappearing in plain sight for longer than I care to admit. Not because I'm dramatic, Lord knows I've never been dramatic. Not because I'm bitter or jealous or any of those things people say about women my age when we finally speak up. But because I've been watching. Really watching. And what I've seen has been slowly breaking my heart for the past 6 years. 6 years. That's how long I've been the stranger in my own life. You see, here's what nobody talks about when they share those beautiful multi-generational holiday photos on Facebook. Here's what gets cropped out of the frame, edited out of the story, conveniently forgotten when people talk about the blessing of family living together. My son Marcus, his wife Thessaly, and their 4 children have been living in my house, the house I bought with my late husband Robert 47 years ago, since Marcus got laid off from his engineering job in 2018. 6 years ago, it was supposed to be temporary. 3 months, maybe 6 at the outside, just until Marcus found another position and they could get back on their feet. Thessaly was pregnant with their youngest, little Isaiah, and they'd just bought a new SUV right before the layoff happened. They needed help, they said. Just a little help from family while they figured things out. I said yes because that's what mothers do. That's what family does. You help when people need help. But 6 years later, Marcus has a better job than he ever had before. 6 years later, they've got 2 new cars in my driveway, a pool table in my basement, and a 75-inch television mounted on my living room wall. 6 years later, Thessaly has redecorated every room in my house except the small bedroom where I sleep, the room that used to be my craft room, where I used to sew quilts for church fundraisers and refinish furniture for fun. My craft room. That's where I live now. In my own house. But here's the thing that really gets me, the thing that sits in my chest like a stone every single day. They don't see it as my house anymore. Somewhere along the way, it became the family house. Somewhere in those 6 years, I stopped being the homeowner and became Grandma Sarah who lives with us. Lives with them. In the house I've been making payments on since 1977. You want to know how I know this? Because Thessaly's friends refer to it as Marcus and Thessaly's place. Because when the neighbors ask about the renovations, the ones nobody asked my permission for, they talk to Marcus like he's the homeowner. Because when Thessaly posts photos of our beautiful home online, I'm never in them. Not because I'm camera shy, but because I don't fit the narrative of the young family building their dream life. I'm the elderly relative they're caring for. That's how Thessaly explains it to her book club friends when they ask why I'm always there when they come over for wine night. Oh, Marcus's mom lives with us. We're her caregivers now. Caregivers. As if I can't dress myself, can't drive, can't manage my own finances. As if the woman who raised 2 children alone after Robert's heart attack at 54, who worked 2 jobs to keep this house, who survived breast cancer and buried both her parents, suddenly needs a 32-year-old to manage her life. But I didn't say anything. You know why? Because I was useful. I was the built-in babysitter for 14-year-old Marcus Jr., 12-year-old Destiny, 9-year-old Harmony, and 6-year-old Isaiah. I was the homework supervisor, the sick day caregiver, the summer vacation entertainment coordinator. I was the one who picked up kids when plans changed, who stayed home when everyone else had somewhere to be, who made sure dinner was ready when the real adults got home from their important lives. I was useful. And useful people don't complain when their opinions about their own living space get ignored. Useful people don't point out that maybe, just maybe, after 6 years of free housing, free childcare, and free utilities, it might be time to have a conversation about boundaries, respect, and the difference between helping family and being taken advantage of. Useful people just smile and say, "Of course, honey," when Thessaly mentions that her mother is coming to stay for 2 weeks and asks if I can sleep on the couch in the den so they can give Grandma Dorothy the guest room. The guest room that used to be my bedroom. The bedroom I gave up 4 years ago when they decided they needed a home office and my needs were less important than Marcus's need for a quiet space to work from home. Work from home. In the house I own. While I sleep on a fold-out couch in what used to be my husband's den. For 6 years, I've been a tenant in my own home, except tenants pay rent and have rights. The Christmas dinner exclusion wasn't the first humiliation. It was just the most public one, the one that finally forced me to see what I'd been pretending not to notice for months. Maybe years. The pattern had been building slowly, so gradually that I didn't recognize it until it was suffocating me. It started small. Thessaly would make plans for the family and forget to include me in the head count. Marcus would refer to household decisions as things we had decided when I'd never been consulted. The kids would talk about our house and our backyard as if I were a guest who'd overstayed her welcome. Then it got more pointed. Thessaly's friends would come over and be surprised to see me there, as if my presence in my own living room was unexpected. Marcus would introduce me as my mom who helps out with the kids instead of my mom whose house this is. Neighbors would ask Marcus about property improvements as if he were the one who'd have to approve and pay for them. But the moment I really should have seen it clearly, the moment I should have understood how far things had gone, was last Thanksgiving. Thessaly's whole family came for dinner, her parents, her brother and his wife, her grandmother. 15 people total. And when it came time to seat everyone, Thessaly asked if I'd mind eating in the kitchen so there would be room for everyone at the dining room table. The dining room table I'd bought. In the house I owned. During the holiday I was hosting. But I minded eating in the kitchen like the help while strangers sat at my table. I minded it so much that I could barely swallow my food. I minded it so much that I went to bed that night and cried for the first time since Robert's funeral. But I didn't say anything. Because Thessaly had worked so hard on the dinner, and Marcus seemed happy to have his in-laws there, and the kids were excited about the big family gathering. Because I didn't want to be the difficult old lady who ruined everyone's good time with complaints about seating arrangements. Because I'd forgotten that my comfort mattered too. Christmas was supposed to be different. Christmas was supposed to be about our family, Marcus, Thessaly, the kids, and me. Intimate. Personal. The kind of holiday where we could focus on each other instead of impressing relatives or friends. But 3 days before Christmas, Thessaly announced that they'd invited a few people to join us. Her best friend Chloe and her husband and 2 kids. Her coworker Amanda and her boyfriend. Her cousin Derek and his new girlfriend. Marcus's college roommate who was in town for the holidays. 16 extra people. In my house. For Christmas dinner. It'll be so much more festive this way, Thessaly explained to me while she made lists of everything we'd need to buy, everything we'd need to prepare, everything we'd need to rearrange to accommodate her impromptu party. Don't worry about anything, Grandma Sarah. We've got it all handled. We. As in not me. That's when I realized I wasn't being invited to Christmas dinner. I was being informed about Christmas dinner. In my own home. But the real slap in the face, the moment that should have woken me up if I'd been paying attention, came 2 days before Christmas when I offered to help with the menu planning. "Oh, that's so sweet," Thessaly said, not looking up from her laptop where she was ordering decorations online. "But we've already got everything figured out. We're going for more of a modern, sophisticated vibe this year. Clean lines, neutral colors, Instagram-worthy presentation. You know how it is." I didn't know how it was. I knew how Christmas had always been in this house, warm, comfortable, focused on tradition and family recipes and the kind of decorations that meant something instead of just looking good in photos. I knew how Christmas felt when it was about celebrating the people you love instead of impressing the people you barely know. But apparently, that wasn't sophisticated enough for Thessaly's vision of what Christmas should look like. "What about Grandma Rose's dinner rolls?" I asked. My mother's recipe, the one I'd been making every Christmas for 45 years. The one the kids always asked for, the one Marcus used to beg me to make early so he could have them for breakfast on Christmas morning. "Oh, we're doing a catered bread selection this year," Thessaly said. "Much easier, and, honestly, people expect a certain level of quality when you're entertaining. A certain level of quality." As if the dinner rolls I'd been perfecting for 4 decades weren't good enough for her friends. That night, I lay in my narrow bed in my craft room turned bedroom and tried to remember when I'd stopped being the grandmother who made Christmas special and started being the elderly relative who needed to stay out of the way while other people made Christmas happen. I couldn't pinpoint the exact moment, and that's what scared me the most. It had been so gradual, so subtle, that I'd adapted to each small erosion of my place in my own family without recognizing what was happening to me. Christmas morning, I woke up early like I always do. Not because I had anywhere to be, but because old habits die hard, and I've been an early riser for 70 years. I made coffee in the kitchen that had been rearranged for optimal catering access, and I sat at the breakfast nook that had been turned into a bar station for cocktail service. The presents under the tree, my tree, the Douglas fir I'd been buying from the same lot for 20 years, were beautifully wrapped in coordinated silver and white paper. Elegant. Sophisticated. Nothing like the colorful, chaotic mix of wrapping paper we'd always used, where each person had their own pattern and you could tell from across the room which gifts belonged to which family member. I found my gifts tucked in the back, wrapped in the same silver paper as everyone else's. For small boxes that turned out to contain a scarf, a candle, a picture frame, and a gift card to a restaurant I'd never heard of. Generic gifts. The kind of gifts you buy for someone you don't really know but feel obligated to include. The kids got iPads and gaming systems and designer clothes. Marcus got a new watch and golf clubs and a weekend getaway to a resort in the mountains. Thessaly got jewelry and a spa package and a new laptop. I got a candle. But I didn't say anything. Because it was Christmas morning and the kids were excited and everyone seemed happy with their gifts. Because I didn't want to be the ungrateful grandmother who complained about generosity. Because I'd forgotten that generosity is supposed to come from the heart, not from obligation. The dinner guests started arriving at 3. Thessaly had spent the morning setting up a photographer's dream in my dining room: white linens, silver chargers, crystal glasses, and centerpieces that looked like they belonged in a magazine spread. It was beautiful. It was also completely impersonal, completely removed from anything that had ever defined Christmas in this house. My grandmother's china was nowhere to be seen. The Christmas dishes we'd used every year since Marcus was born were stacked in the pantry, replaced by borrowed serving pieces that photographed better. The candles I'd collected over 40 years of Christmas celebrations were in storage, replaced by identical white pillars that provided better lighting. Even the Christmas music was different. Instead of the mix of traditional carols and Frank Sinatra that had been our family soundtrack for decades, Thessaly had created a playlist of modern, instrumental versions that she said were more sophisticated for entertaining. Everything was more sophisticated. Nothing was more meaningful. But the real moment of truth, the moment that changed everything, came when it was time to sit down for dinner. Thessaly had created a seating chart, an actual seating chart, with little cards in elegant script, and she moved around the table placing people with the precision of a wedding planner. I watched her seat Marcus at the head of the table, the seat where Robert used to sit, where I'd been sitting since he died. I watched her place herself at the foot, where I'd been sitting for the past 6 years, the spot that had been mine by default and tradition. I watched her seat her friends and coworkers and Marcus's college buddy in the chairs around the table. And then I kept watching, waiting for her to tell me where I was supposed to sit. Waiting for someone to notice that there were 17 people and 16 chairs. Waiting for someone to realize that the person whose house this was didn't have a place at her own Christmas table. "Grandma Sarah," Thessaly finally said, looking up from her seating arrangements with a bright, hostess smile, "would you mind terribly eating in the kitchen today? I know it's not ideal, but with the photographer coming and everything, we really need to stick to the planned table setting." The photographer. She'd hired a photographer to document Christmas dinner in my house, and I was being excluded because I didn't fit the aesthetic. I stood there for what felt like an hour but was probably only 30 seconds, looking around the table at 16 people who were settling into my dining room like they belonged there. Like I was the one who didn't belong there. Marcus didn't meet my eyes. He was talking to his college friend about sports, pretending he couldn't hear what his wife had just said to his mother. The kids were arguing over who got to sit next to whom, too excited about the fancy dinner to notice that Grandma was being sent to eat alone in the kitchen. None of Thessaly's friends looked uncomfortable. Why would they? They didn't know this was my house, my table, my Christmas tradition being dismantled for their entertainment. They thought they were guests at Marcus and Thessaly's holiday party, and the elderly relative was being appropriately shuffled aside so the real family could enjoy their celebration. I looked at my son, this man I'd raised, whose education I'd paid for, whose children I'd been caring for unpaid for 6 years, and waited for him to say something. Waited for him to tell his wife that his mother wasn't going to eat in the kitchen while strangers sat at her table. Waited for him to show some basic respect for the woman who'd given him everything, including the roof over his head. But Marcus just kept talking about football statistics, and I realized he was relieved. Relieved that I wasn't going to cause a scene. Relieved that I was going to go quietly to the kitchen and let his wife manage Christmas without interference from the old woman who'd been making Christmas happen in this house since before Thessaly was born. That's when I understood. Not just that I was being disrespected, I'd known that for months, but that I was being disrespected with the full knowledge and consent of my own son. Marcus wasn't failing to protect me because he didn't notice what was happening. He was failing to protect me because he decided his wife's vision was more important than his mother's dignity. He'd chosen her comfort over my basic human decency. And he'd done it so smoothly, so automatically, that I could tell it wasn't the first time. I didn't say anything to the table full of people. I didn't announce that this was my house and my table and my Christmas dinner. I didn't point out that I was being treated like hired help while strangers enjoyed the hospitality I was providing. I didn't ask my son when he decided that keeping his wife happy was more important than showing basic respect to his mother. I just walked to my small bedroom, closed the door, and sat on the edge of my narrow bed with the sounds of my own Christmas dinner happening without me in the next room. I could hear laughter and conversation and the clink of silverware on my grandmother's china, except it wasn't my grandmother's china anymore, because nothing in this house was mine anymore. That's when I made the decision. Not an emotional decision driven by hurt feelings or wounded pride. A practical decision based on a clear assessment of my situation and what needed to change. I wasn't going to spend the last years of my life being useful to people who didn't value me. I wasn't going to continue subsidizing the lifestyle of adults who treated me like an inconvenience. I wasn't going to keep accepting disrespect in exchange for the privilege of being needed. I was going to take my life back. Monday morning, while Thessaly was at her Pilates class and Marcus was at his office and the kids were still on Christmas break watching movies in my living room, I called my attorney. James Morrison has been handling my legal affairs for 18 years. He's discreet, efficient, and doesn't waste time on small talk or unnecessary questions. When I told him I needed formal eviction notices drawn up for my son and his family, he just asked for the details and the timeline. 60 days seemed generous. More generous than they deserved, but generous enough that I couldn't be accused of throwing a family with children out on the street without warning. "Are you prepared for this to get ugly, Serafina?" James asked. Not judgmental. Not trying to talk me out of it. Just making sure I understood what I was stepping into. "James," I said, "I'm 73 years old. I buried a husband at 54, raised 2 children as a single mother, survived cancer, and built a successful catering business from nothing. I think I can handle 2 entitled adults having a tantrum when they're told they can't live rent-free forever." The papers were ready by Wednesday. I left them on Marcus and Thessaly's bed, the bed in what used to be my master bedroom, while they were out at some New Year's Eve party I hadn't been invited to. With my grandbabies staying at Thessaly's mother's house, because apparently Grandma Sarah wasn't responsible enough to babysit during a party night, even though I'd been their primary caregiver for 6 years. You want to know what betrayal sounds like? It sounds like your daughter-in-law calling your sister at 7 in the morning to report that you've had some kind of breakdown and need immediate family intervention. It sounds like your son leaving voicemails that start with, "Mom, we need to talk about what's gotten into you," as if demanding basic respect in your own home is a symptom of mental illness. But it also sounds like your neighbor Mrs. Patterson knocking on your door with a pot of soup and saying, "Honey, I was wondering when you were going to stop letting them walk all over you. I've been watching that girl treat you like hired help for years." Mrs. Patterson. 78 years old, sharp as a tack, and apparently more aware of what was happening in my house than I'd been. She'd seen Thessaly directing me to park on the street because the driveway was for family cars, even though my name was on the deed and theirs wasn't. She'd heard Marcus explaining to the lawn service that his mother would handle payment because she likes to feel useful. Likes to feel useful. As if paying for services in my own home was a hobby I'd picked up to pass the time in retirement. My nephew tried the same thing. Mrs. Patterson told me over coffee in my kitchen, the first coffee I'd had at my own table in months. Moved back in after his divorce with his 2 kids. Started making changes, bringing friends over, treating me like the live-in babysitter. Took me 2 years to work up the courage to give him notice. "How did it go?" I asked. Hard at first. He tried everything: guilt, anger, family pressure, financial manipulation. Told everyone I was being cruel to my own blood, kicking out innocent children, abandoning family when they needed me most. She sipped her coffee and looked out the window at the garden I hadn't been able to enjoy because it had been turned into a play area without my input. But you know what? 6 months later, he thanked me. Said it was the push he needed to get his life together and stop depending on other people to solve his problems. That's when I started to understand that this wasn't about me suddenly becoming a terrible mother or an unreasonable person. This wasn't about me losing my mind or having a breakdown or any of the other explanations that were already spreading through my family like wildfire. This was about something that happens to parents, especially mothers, all across this country every single day. Something nobody talks about because it sounds too harsh, too unforgiving, too removed from the idealized vision of multi-generational families supporting each other. We become useful instead of valued. We become resources instead of people. And useful people, resource people, don't get to set boundaries or make demands or expect basic courtesy from the people who benefit from their generosity. Useful people just smile and accommodate and sacrifice until there's nothing left of themselves except the services they provide. The real confrontation came on a Saturday morning. Marcus had called and asked for a family meeting to discuss the situation and find a reasonable solution that works for everyone. He brought Thessaly and all 4 kids, which told me everything I needed to know about their strategy. 14-year-old Marcus Jr., 12-year-old Destiny, 9-year-old Harmony, and 6-year-old Isaiah. All of them looking confused and worried because Daddy and Mommy had spent the past week explaining how Grandma Sarah was going through a difficult time and making some very concerning decisions that were going to hurt the whole family. We sat in my living room. The living room where Robert and I had brought our babies home from the hospital, where we'd celebrated birthdays and holidays and graduations, where I'd sat alone for 3 years after his death before Marcus's family moved in and made it theirs and listened to their presentation. Thessaly did most of the talking. She's always been good at talking, at making her position sound reasonable and logical and completely focused on what's best for everyone involved. She explained how disruptive it would be for the children to change schools in the middle of the academic year. She talked about the housing market and how difficult it was for a family of 6 to find affordable housing in this neighborhood. She mentioned how much they'd invested in improvements to the house, how they'd made it their home. The improvements. The pool table they'd bought for the basement. The television they'd mounted on my wall. The paint colors they'd chosen for rooms I'd never been consulted about. The landscaping changes they'd made to my backyard without asking. The crown molding in the hallway bathroom that Marcus had installed himself. We've put so much of ourselves into this house, Thessaly said, looking around my living room like she was seeing her own creation instead of the home I'd been building for 47 years. It's not just a place we've been staying. It's become our home. The children's home. The only home they really remember. Then she moved into the emotional territory, the part where my grandchildren became weapons in the battle for my own house. Destiny has her best friends here. Marcus Jr. is finally doing well in school after we got him into that specialized program. Harmony is in dance classes she loves. Isaiah doesn't understand why Grandma wants them to move away. Isaiah, 6 years old, born in the hospital where I delivered his father 35 years earlier. Isaiah, who called me Grandma Sarah and drew me pictures and fell asleep in my lap when he was tired. Isaiah, who didn't understand that Grandma wasn't trying to send him away. Grandma was trying to teach his parents that love doesn't mean unlimited access to other people's homes, money, and services. But they weren't going to let me explain that to Isaiah. They were going to let him think that Grandma didn't love him anymore, that Grandma was choosing to hurt him, that Grandma was the bad person in this story. Mom, Marcus finally said, using the voice he'd perfected as a teenager when he wanted something expensive or permission to do something questionable. We're family. Family doesn't charge each other rent. Family takes care of each other. Family doesn't put legal papers and deadlines on love. And there it was. The word that had been used against me for 6 years, twisted into a weapon that made my boundaries look like betrayal. Family. I looked at my son, this man I'd sacrificed for, supported through college, helped through his early marriage, employed in my catering business until he found his engineering job, welcomed into my home when he lost that job, and I said the words that ended our old relationship forever. Family doesn't take advantage of people just because they love them. Family doesn't treat the person who houses and supports them like unpaid staff. Family doesn't exclude their mother from Christmas dinner in her own house because she doesn't fit the Instagram aesthetic they're going for. The silence was deafening. Little Isaiah started crying, which was exactly what they'd hoped for. Harmony asked if Grandma Sarah didn't want to live with them anymore. Destiny, old enough to understand more of what was happening, looked back and forth between her parents and me like she was trying to figure out who was telling the truth. Marcus Jr., almost 15 and definitely old enough to understand the dynamics at play, didn't say anything. But I saw him looking around the living room like he was seeing it for the first time, taking inventory of whose stuff was whose pictures were on the walls, whose furniture filled the space. I love all of you very much, I told those children, because that was the truth and I needed them to hear it from me before their parents spent the next 2 months rewriting history to make me the villain. And, because I love you, I'm going to teach you something important about how people should treat each other. Love doesn't mean taking whatever you can get from people just because they care about you. Love means respecting people, contributing to their lives, making them feel valued instead of used. I looked directly at Marcus, then at Thessaly. You have 60 days to find your own place. I'm not negotiating an extension, I'm not providing moving money, and I'm not babysitting while you house hunt. You're adults with good jobs and 6 years' worth of savings from not paying housing costs. You can figure this out. Thessaly started to cry. Not the quiet, disappointed tears of someone who's been hurt, but the dramatic, almost angry tears of someone who's not getting their way and can't believe they're being held accountable for their behavior. I can't believe you're doing this to us, she said. After everything we've done for you, after how much we've helped you, after how much we've made this house into a real home instead of just some empty place where you were sitting around feeling sorry for yourself. Everything they'd done for me. The help they'd provided. The favor they'd been doing me by living in my house, eating my food, using my utilities, and treating me like an employee in my own home. And there it was, finally out in the open. The narrative they'd been building for 6 years, the story they'd been telling themselves to justify taking over my life. I wasn't the homeowner who'd been supporting them. I was the lonely widow who should be grateful for their company. I wasn't the grandmother providing free housing and childcare. I was the elderly relative they were generously caring for. In their version of reality, they were doing me the favor. Get out, I said quietly. Not shouting, not dramatic, just clear and final. Take the children home, to whatever place you're going to call home for the next 60 days, and get out of my house. Marcus looked like I'd slapped him. Thessaly looked like she couldn't believe someone was finally standing up to her manipulation tactics. The kids looked terrified and confused, which broke my heart but didn't change my mind. Because loving someone doesn't mean enabling their worst behavior. Loving someone doesn't mean accepting disrespect to keep the peace. Loving someone doesn't mean sacrificing your own dignity to avoid difficult conversations. Sometimes loving someone means showing them that their actions have consequences, even when those consequences are painful for everyone involved. They left that afternoon, packed up the kids, and went to Thessaly's parents' house, where they could regroup and plan their next move without having to look at me every day and remember that I was no longer willing to be their unpaid support system. The next 8 weeks were a masterclass in emotional manipulation and family pressure. Thessaly's mother called to tell me how disappointed she was in my selfishness and lack of compassion for innocent children. Marcus's sister drove up from 2 states away to remind me how difficult it is for young families in today's economy and suggest that maybe I was too isolated and needed to consider assisted living where I could have more social interaction. Assisted living. Because a 73-year-old woman who owns her own home, drives her own car, manages her own finances, and runs her own small business obviously needs institutional care if she's not willing to subsidize her son's lifestyle indefinitely. Church friends started mentioning, very casually, how important it is for grandparents to sacrifice for their grandchildren, how blessed I was to have family who wanted to be close to me, how sad it would be if pride got in the way of family harmony. The pastor himself stopped by to discuss the Christian duty of forgiveness and the importance of keeping families together. But the worst part, the part that almost broke my resolve, was the children. Marcus brought them by one evening to collect some of their things, and Isaiah ran to me crying, asking why Grandma didn't want them to live with her anymore. Harmony had made me a card at school apologizing for whatever she'd done wrong. Destiny, trying to be mature and helpful, asked if there was anything she could do to fix things between her parents and me. These children who'd been living in my house for 6 years, who'd grown up calling it home, who'd never done anything wrong except have parents who didn't understand the difference between family support and family exploitation. I almost said yes. Almost told Marcus they could stay, that we'd work something out, that family was more important than property rights or personal dignity or any of the other things I'd been fighting for. Almost. But then I thought about Isaiah growing up thinking it was normal to exclude elderly relatives from holiday dinners if they didn't fit the aesthetic. I thought about Harmony learning that love means accepting whatever treatment people decide to give you. I thought about Destiny watching her mother treat her grandmother like hired help and thinking that was an acceptable way for women to relate to each other. I thought about Marcus Jr., almost 15, seeing his father prioritize his wife's comfort over his mother's basic respect and learning what kind of man he was supposed to become. And I realized that the kindest thing I could do for those children was to show them that boundaries aren't cruelty, that self-respect isn't selfishness, that loving someone doesn't mean letting them take advantage of you. Even when it hurt. Especially when it hurt. So I held Isaiah while he cried, and I told him Grandma loved him more than anything in the world, which was exactly why she was doing something that seemed mean, but was actually about making sure everyone in the family learned how to treat each other with kindness and respect. I helped Harmony pack her favorite stuffed animals and promised her we'd have special grandmother-granddaughter days once her parents found their new home and everyone had time to adjust to the changes. I listened to Destiny's concerns about changing schools and making new friends, and I reminded her that she was smart and kind and capable of handling challenges, just like her parents were capable of handling the challenge of finding their own place to live. And I told Marcus Jr. that growing up sometimes means watching the adults in your life have difficult conversations about respect and boundaries and responsibilities, and that he was old enough to understand that love doesn't mean accepting bad treatment from people just because they're family. They found a rental house 3 weeks before the deadline. For bedrooms, 2.5 bathrooms, a nice yard, in a good school district 20 minutes away. Marcus complained about the rent, even though it was less than they would have been paying me if I'd been charging them market rate for the past 6 years. Thessaly posted on social media about new adventures and exciting changes, but I noticed she never mentioned why they were moving or thanked me for the 6 years of free housing that had enabled them to save enough money for a security deposit and first month's rent. The last day was a Tuesday. They hired a moving company, which surprised me until I realized they'd accumulated an enormous amount of stuff during their 6 years in my house. Furniture, electronics, toys, clothes, kitchen gadgets, sporting equipment, books, games, decorations. 6 years' worth of purchases made possible by not having housing costs. I stayed in my small bedroom while the movers worked. Not because I was hiding or sulking, but because I didn't want to be in the way of their process. And because I didn't trust myself not to cry when I saw my grandbaby's beds being loaded into a truck. When everything was packed and loaded, Marcus knocked on my bedroom door. We stood there looking at each other, this man who was my baby 40 years ago, who I'd taught to ride a bike and helped with homework and supported through every major transition in his life, and I could see that he was struggling with something he wanted to say. Mom, he finally managed. I know you think we took advantage of you, and maybe we did. But we never meant to hurt you. We got comfortable, I guess. We stopped thinking about it as your house and started thinking about it as home. It wasn't an apology exactly. More like an acknowledgement. And it wasn't enough to change anything, but it was something. Marcus, I said, I need you to understand something. I didn't do this to punish you or because I stopped loving you or because I wanted to hurt the children. I did it because I forgot how to be your mother instead of your employee, and you forgot how to be my son instead of my boss. He started to protest, but I held up my hand. For 6 years, you've been living in my house, but you haven't been living with me. You've been living around me, like I was a piece of furniture you had to navigate. And I let it happen because I was afraid that if I wasn't useful to you, you wouldn't want me in your life at all. I could see him processing that, trying to decide whether it was true or fair or accurate. But here's what I learned, honey. If the only way someone wants you in their life is as unpaid help, then they don't really want you in their life at all. They want what you can do for them. And that's not love. That's not family. That's just convenient. Marcus looked like he wanted to argue, but Thessaly was calling from the driveway that the movers were ready to go and they needed to get to the new house to meet them there. I hope, I said, that when you're living in your own space and paying your own bills and taking care of your own children without my subsidies, you'll remember what it feels like to be responsible for your own life. And I hope that will help you understand why I needed to be responsible for mine. They left their keys on the kitchen counter. No dramatic goodbyes, no final arguments, no big emotional scene. Just the sound of car doors closing and engines starting, and my family driving away from the house that had been their home for 6 years and was finally mine again. The silence that followed was different from any silence I'd experienced in the past 6 years. Not the silence of being ignored or overlooked or excluded. The silence of being alone by choice in my own space, with my own thoughts and my own schedule and my own decisions to make. I walked through my house slowly, room by room, like I was touring a place I'd never seen before. The living room without their oversized television and gaming systems. The dining room with my grandmother's china back in the cabinet where it belonged. The kitchen with my appliances arranged the way I'd always liked them. The master bedroom that I could finally move back into after 4 years of sleeping in what used to be my craft room. My house. Mine again. The first month was the hardest, and not for the reasons I'd expected. I wasn't lonely. I'd been lonely in a house full of people for years. I wasn't sad about the quiet. I'd been craving quiet in the midst of constant chaos for longer than I cared to admit. But I was grieving. Grieving the relationship I'd thought I had with my son and his family. Grieving the grandmother I'd thought I was to those children. Grieving the illusion that being needed was the same thing as being loved. And I was angry. Not the hot, immediate anger that burns out quickly, but the deep, sustained anger that comes when you finally understand how thoroughly you've been taken advantage of, how completely you've been manipulated, how systematically you've been trained to accept less than you deserve. For 6 years, I'd been told that demanding basic respect was selfish. That expecting courtesy in my own home was unreasonable. That wanting to be included in decisions about my own property was controlling. That asking for gratitude for my generosity was petty. For 6 years, I'd been gaslit into believing that I was the problem, that I was difficult, that I was ungrateful for the privilege of being useful to people who saw me as a resource rather than a person. But slowly, as the weeks passed and I settled back into living in my own space according to my own preferences, something else grew in that silence. Something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. The freedom to eat dinner at 5:30 if I wanted to, or 8:30 if I didn't. The freedom to watch what I wanted on television without negotiating with 4 other people. The freedom to have friends over without checking whether it would interfere with someone else's plans. The freedom to spend my money on things I wanted instead of things other people needed. The freedom to be Serafina again instead of just Grandma Sarah, the convenient caregiver. I started taking painting classes at the community college. I joined a book club at the library. I volunteered at the animal shelter on weekends. I took a trip to visit my sister in Colorado, the first vacation I'd taken in 8 years because there had always been some reason I couldn't leave town, some child who needed watching or some family obligation that required my presence. For the first time in 6 years, I made my house mine again. I repainted the guest bedroom, my old bedroom, a soft lavender that Thessaly had always said was too bold for the master suite. I bought new furniture for the living room, comfortable pieces in colors I loved instead of practical pieces in neutral tones that photographed well. I filled the den with my sewing supplies and turned it back into the craft room where I could work on quilts and refinish furniture and pursue hobbies that were mine instead of activities that served other people's needs. I planted a garden full of flowers instead of vegetables because I'd always loved flowers but had been told repeatedly that vegetable gardens were more practical for a family with growing children. For the first time in 6 years, I made choices based on what I wanted instead of what other people thought I should want. The first contact came 3 months after they moved out. Not from Marcus, but from Thessaly. A text message that said, "Hi Grandma Sarah. The kids have been asking about you and wondering if they can come visit sometime. Would you be open to that?" Careful language. Diplomatic. No acknowledgement of what had led to the separation. No apology for 6 years of disrespect. No recognition that visiting me was different from assuming access to me. Just a question about whether I was open to seeing my grandchildren, as if I were the one who damaged the relationship. I waited 2 days before responding. Not to be petty, but because I needed time to think about what kind of relationship I wanted with them going forward and what boundaries would be necessary to protect both my well-being and theirs. "I would love to see the children," I finally texted back. "Let's plan something for this weekend. I'm free Saturday afternoon from 2 to 5. Specific times. Clear boundaries." An invitation instead of an assumption. Thessaly's response came back quickly, "Great. We'll drop them off Saturday and pick them up whenever." They're so excited. "I'll be available until 5, I texted back. "Please plan pickup accordingly." It was a small thing, insisting on a specific end time instead of whenever. But small things matter when you're rebuilding a relationship from a foundation of respect instead of convenience. Saturday came, and with it, 4 children who'd grown in the 3 months since I'd seen them. Isaiah, now 6 and a half, had lost a tooth and learned to ride his bike without training wheels. Harmony had started 4th grade and joined the school choir. Destiny was in 7th grade and had braces and opinions about everything. Marcus Jr. was taller and his voice was changing, and he looked more like his father every time I saw him. They were still my grandbabies, but they were also different. More independent. Less automatically affectionate. More careful around me, like they weren't sure what the rules were anymore or whether I was someone they could trust not to hurt them. It broke my heart and filled me with resolve at the same time. These children had been casualties of their parents' inability to maintain healthy boundaries, and now they were all trying to figure out how to love each other across new lines that hadn't existed before. We spent the afternoon baking cookies, something I hadn't been able to do in my own kitchen for years because Thessaly preferred store-bought treats that looked more professional when she photographed them for social media. We made chocolate chip cookies from my mother's recipe, the one I'd tried to teach Thessaly early in their marriage before she decided my cooking was too old-fashioned for their lifestyle. The kids remembered helping me bake when they were smaller, before their mother decided that homemade was inferior to purchased. They remembered which ingredients to add when, how to tell when the cookies were done, the way the kitchen smelled like vanilla and butter and home. "I miss this, Grandma Sarah," Harmony said, licking cookie batter from the spoon while I pretended not to notice. "Mommy buys good cookies, but they don't taste like yours." "That's because these cookies are made with love," I told her, "and love always tastes better than convenience." It was a loaded statement, and I knew it. But it was also true, and I wanted her to remember it. Marcus Jr., old enough to understand more of the subtext, asked the question I'd been expecting. "Grandma, are you still mad at Mom and Dad?" I stopped mixing the second batch of dough and looked at this young man who was trying to navigate his loyalty to his parents and his relationship with me. "I'm not mad, honey," I said carefully. "I'm disappointed that it took me so long to ask for the respect I deserved, and I'm disappointed that they couldn't figure out how to give me that respect without being forced to. But I'm not mad. I'm just learning how to be your grandmother in a way that's healthy for all of us." "What does that mean?" Destiny asked. "It means I love you all very much, but I can't go back to being taken for granted or treated like hired help. It means when you visit, it's because we want to spend time together, not because your parents need free babysitting. It means I get to be grandma, not just the convenient person who shows up when there's work to be done." They absorbed this information quietly, and I could see them thinking about the difference between the grandmother who'd lived with them and the grandmother they were visiting now. "Do you like living alone?" Isaiah asked with the directness that only 6-year-olds can manage. "I like living in my own space," I told him. "I like being able to make my own choices about my own house. I like having you visit because I want to see you, not because someone needs me to watch you." "Are we going to keep visiting?" Harmony wanted to know. "As long as you want to," I promised. "And as long as your parents understand that visiting means respecting my schedule and my rules and my boundaries." At 5 o'clock, Thessaly and Marcus arrived to pick up the children. They looked around my house, their former home, with expressions I couldn't quite read. Surprise, maybe, at how different it looked now that it reflected my preferences instead of theirs. Curiosity about how I was managing without them. Something that might have been envy at how peaceful and organized everything seemed. "Thank you for watching them," Thessaly said, falling automatically into the old pattern of treating my time with my grandchildren like a service I'd provided rather than a relationship I was building. I wasn't watching them, I corrected gently but firmly. I was visiting with them. There's a difference. It was another small thing, but small things add up to big changes in how people think about and treat each other. We established a pattern after that. The children visited every other weekend, and sometimes during school breaks, but always with advanced planning and clear expectations about timing. No more assuming I was available whenever it was convenient for their parents. No more treating my house like a drop-off center for free childcare. And slowly, something beautiful began to happen. My relationship with those children became richer, more intentional, more genuine. Without the daily grind of homework supervision and meal preparation and emergency babysitting, our time together became about connection instead of convenience. They told me about school and friends and dreams and worries because they wanted to share with me, not because I was the person who happened to be available to listen. They asked for my advice about problems because they valued my perspective, not because I was the adult in charge of solving their issues. They learned that Grandma Sarah had interests and opinions and a life outside of serving their needs. They discovered that I could be fun and interesting and worth spending time with for my own sake, not just because I was useful. And I learned that being wanted is so much better than being needed. That choosing to spend time with someone is so much more meaningful than being obligated to spend time with them. That love freely given and gratefully received is infinitely more precious than service extracted and taken for granted. The real test came 8 months later, when Marcus called to ask if I'd be willing to watch the kids for a week while he and Thessaly took a second honeymoon to celebrate their anniversary. The old me would have said yes immediately, would have been grateful to be needed, would have rearranged my entire schedule to accommodate their vacation plans. The new me said, "Let me check my calendar and get back to you." I had a painting class that week. I had a book club meeting. I had lunch plans with Mrs. Patterson and a volunteer commitment at the animal shelter. I had a life that didn't revolve around their convenience. "I can do Thursday through Sunday," I told Marcus when I called him back. "But I'll need you to make other arrangements for Monday through Wednesday." There was a pause, and I could hear him processing the fact that his mother wasn't automatically available for whatever he needed whenever he needed it. "Mom," he said carefully, "it's hard to find childcare for that long. And expensive." "I'm sure it is," I agreed. "But planning your vacation childcare isn't my responsibility. I'm happy to help for part of the time, if it works with my schedule. But you'll need to figure out the rest." It wasn't cruel. It wasn't unreasonable. It was just clear about the difference between choosing to help and being expected to solve other people's problems at the expense of my own plans. They figured it out. Thessaly's mother took the first 3 days, and I took the last 4. The kids had a good time with both of us, and Marcus and Thessaly got their vacation. But more importantly, a precedent was set. I was someone who could choose to help, not someone who existed to serve their needs. I was someone whose schedule and preferences mattered, not someone who was expected to drop everything whenever family called. I was a person again, not just a resource. The apology, when it finally came, was nothing like what I'd imagined it would be. Not from Thessaly. I never got a real apology from Thessaly, just a gradual shift toward more polite and respectful interaction. But from Marcus, a year and a half after they'd moved out. We were sitting on my back porch, watching Isaiah and Harmony play in the garden while Destiny practiced piano inside and Marcus Jr. worked on homework at the kitchen table. A normal Saturday afternoon visit, the kind we'd fallen into a comfortable rhythm with. "Mom," Marcus said suddenly, "I need to tell you something." I looked at him, this middle-aged man who was still my son but had become someone I respected again instead of just someone I loved out of obligation. "I've been thinking a lot about those 6 years we lived here. About how we treated you. About what it must have been like for you." He was quiet for a moment, watching his children play in the space that had once been their backyard. "I think we lost sight of the fact that you weren't just letting us stay here. You were giving us your life." I didn't say anything, just waited for him to work through whatever he needed to say. "We got so comfortable with taking from you that we forgot to give anything back. We got so used to your generosity that we started to feel entitled to it. And somewhere along the way, we stopped seeing you as our mother and started seeing you as, I don't know, the person who made our life easier." It wasn't a perfect apology. It didn't address the Christmas dinner exclusion or the years of being treated like hired help or the way they'd tried to manipulate me through the children when I'd finally stood up for myself. But it was honest. And it was a start. "Marcus," I said, "I need you to understand something. I didn't kick you out because I stopped loving you or because I wanted to hurt you. I kicked you out because I'd forgotten how to love myself, and you'd forgotten how to see me as someone who deserved love instead of just someone who provided services." "I know that now," he said. "It took me way too long to understand it, but I know that now. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry it took eviction papers for me to remember that you're my mother, not my employee. I'm sorry it took losing this house for me to realize what we'd taken from you. I'm sorry we made you feel invisible in your own life. It was enough. Not perfect, but enough. Thank you for saying that," I told him. "And thank you for learning to be my son again instead of just someone who needed things from me." We sat in comfortable silence after that, watching his children play in my garden, both of us understanding that our relationship had been rebuilt on a foundation of mutual respect instead of one-sided obligation. That was 6 months ago. Now, as I write the story, I can tell you what my life looks like 2 years after I took it back. I wake up every morning in my own bedroom, in the house I own, surrounded by choices I made for my own happiness and comfort. I have breakfast when I want it, watch what I want on television, make plans based on my own preferences and interests. I see my grandchildren regularly, but as their grandmother who chooses to be involved in their lives, not as their unpaid caregiver who's expected to be available whenever needed. They call me because they want to talk to me, not because they need something from me. They visit because they enjoy spending time with me, not because their parents need free babysitting. I have a relationship with Marcus and Thessaly that's polite, respectful, and boundaried. We'll never be as close as we were before. Too much damage was done. Too many lines were crossed for us to go back to the easy intimacy we once shared. But we found a way to be family that doesn't require me to disappear into usefulness or them to pretend that 6 years of exploitation never happened. Most importantly, I've learned the difference between being loved and being needed, between being valued as a person and being appreciated as a resource, between family support and family exploitation. And I've learned that it's never too late to demand better for yourself, even when the people who love you have gotten comfortable with giving you less than you deserve. But here's the thing I want you to understand. The reason I'm telling you this story that some people will think makes me sound bitter or unforgiving or cruel. This isn't just my story. This is happening to parents, especially mothers, all across this country right now. There are grandmothers sleeping in craft rooms while their adult children make decisions about their living rooms. There are fathers paying for everything while their grown kids treat them like generous landlords instead of beloved parents. There are parents providing free childcare, free housing, free financial support, free emotional labor while being treated like convenient resources instead of people worthy of basic respect. There are families where helping each other has become code for the older generation sacrifices everything so the younger generation can live beyond their means. Where taking care of family means the people with the most resources and the fewest boundaries get taken advantage of by the people with the most demands and the least gratitude. And there are thousands of people my age who are afraid to set boundaries because they've been told that demanding respect makes them selfish, that expecting gratitude makes them petty, that insisting on basic courtesy makes them difficult. Let me tell you something about selfishness. Selfishness is moving into your mother's house rent-free and then redecorating it without her permission. Selfishness is excluding your father from family gatherings because he doesn't fit the image you're trying to project. Selfishness is treating your parents like unpaid employees and then calling them ungrateful when they ask for basic respect. Asking for courtesy in your own home isn't selfish. Expecting gratitude for your generosity isn't petty. Demanding to be treated like a person instead of a resource isn't difficult. It's necessary. It's healthy. It's what people who love each other do for each other. So if you're listening to this story and recognizing yourself in it, if you're nodding along because you've been sleeping in what used to be your office while someone else makes decisions about your kitchen, if you've been providing free services while being treated like hired help, if you've been disappearing into usefulness while other people live their lives in your space, I want you to know something. You are not required to set yourself on fire to keep other people warm. You are not obligated to shrink your life to make room for people who should be building their own lives. You are not responsible for subsidizing the lifestyle choices of people who are capable of taking care of themselves. Your love is not measured by your willingness to be taken advantage of. Your worth as a parent is not determined by your availability as an unpaid service provider. Your value as a family member is not based on how much inconvenience you're willing to accept in the name of keeping the peace. You have permission to want more than being tolerated in your own space. You have permission to expect basic respect from people you've spent decades caring for. You have permission to charge rent, to require appreciation, to demand that the people who benefit from your generosity treat you like the human being you are instead of the resource they think you should be. And if they can't love you without using you, if they can't appreciate you without taking advantage of you, if they can't maintain a relationship with you that doesn't require you to accept less than you deserve, then the problem was never your boundaries. The problem is that they never learned how to love you properly in the first place. Real love doesn't require you to disappear. Real love doesn't ask you to be grateful for scraps of attention and moments of inclusion. Real love doesn't make you feel selfish for wanting basic human decency from the people who supposedly care about you most. Real love wants you to have a seat at your own table. Real love insists that you be treated with respect in your own home. Real love values your comfort, your preferences, your needs, your boundaries. Real love sees you as a person worth cherishing, not just a resource worth using. So here's my question for you, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. If someone's love for you depends on your willingness to accept less than you deserve, is that actually love at all? And if you know it's not, if you can see clearly that what you've been calling love is actually exploitation dressed up in family obligations, what are you going to do about it? Because I can tell you what I did about it. I chose myself. I chose my dignity. I chose my right to be respected in my own home and valued in my own family. I chose to be loved instead of just used. And that choice? It gave me back my life. This Christmas, I'm hosting dinner again. But this time, everyone who sits at my table will be there because they want to spend time with me, not because they need something from me. This time, the menu will include dishes I want to make, served on china I choose to use, in a house decorated according to my preferences. This time, when someone asks what they can bring, it won't be a polite formality, it will be a real question about how they can contribute to our celebration instead of just consuming it. This time, I'll be the grandmother who's honored and included, not the elderly relative who's managed and sidelined. This time, I'll be a person having Christmas with people who love her, not a resource providing Christmas for people who need her. And if that sounds like too much to ask for, if that sounds selfish or demanding or unreasonable, then you haven't been listening carefully enough. Because this was never about me becoming difficult or demanding or impossible to please. This was about me finally understanding that I deserved better than what I'd been accepting. This was about me learning that love without respect isn't love at all. It's just convenient emotional manipulation. This was about me discovering that being needed isn't the same as being valued, that being useful isn't the same as being loved, that being taken for granted isn't the same as being appreciated. And once you understand those distinctions, once you really see them clearly, you can never go back to accepting less than you deserve. You can never go back to being grateful for whatever scraps of attention people decide to throw your way. You can never go back to being convenient instead of cherished. You become someone who knows her worth. Someone who insists on respect. Someone who understands that the people who truly love her will rise to meet her standards instead of asking her to lower them. You become someone who saves the best seat at the table for herself. And trust me, that seat? It's been waiting for you all along.